Well lads, what's up? Activision just released a second white paper explaining in detail how skill is used as a ranking factor in matchmaking for COD. A lot of popular COD Twitter accounts, or X accounts, whatever you want to call it, are starting to report on it. I'll leave a link to the full white paper in the description below, so if you want to check it out for yourself, you can. Now, I'm just going to say this, I wouldn't trust a word that comes out of Activision's mouth. There is a lot of doublespeak going on, and they are purposely trying to steer the conversation about matchmaking into a debate about skill. The real matchmaking system used in COD, or at least its main goal, is to encourage players to play more often and for longer. They manipulate the lobbies in order to achieve this goal. It's not about creating a fair, balanced and competitive environment. It's about making sure each player experiences wins and losses more proportionately. The irony of engagement optimized matchmaking is that it only works on players who aren't aware of it. When a player becomes aware of engagement optimized matchmaking and how Activision are purposely rigging multiplayer and Warzone lobbies, players don't want to play the game longer or spend money on skins or other DLC. Players get annoyed because you're literally manipulating how they experience the game in real time. Anyway, before we jump into this video, I just want to say thanks to everyone who liked and commented on my previous video. I think my subs like tripled, so that was fucking mad, to be honest. But yeah, anyway, if you're unaware of what skill-based matchmaking is or what engagement optimized matchmaking is, then I highly suggest you check out my previous video called How Call of Duty Multiplayer is Rigged. If you like this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel. It really helps me out. Right, so Activision states that COD's matchmaking system's main goal is to create the best experience for our player community. The majority of people who played COD games prior to Modern Warfare 2019, the year your matchmaking system dramatically changed, prefer the matchmaking system in previous titles. You can claim that your goal is to create the best experiences for players, but in reality, your main goal is to keep people playing the game longer so they spend more money on microtransactions. They say skill is how well a player can be expected to perform against the rest of the population in a given game mode. This is based on previous performance. Activision claims that when a player's skill is calculated after each match, all players in the match are then compared to one another, regardless of the team you're on. Based on this, each player's skill value is updated. They provide an example of some simple performance metrics when applied to TDM. The skill calculation involves several parameters. 1. Match total kills, 2. Kill to death ratio, and 3. Kills to deaths by enemies. So basically, Activision talks about why match total kills has poor cardinality. Cardinality is a term used to describe the size or numbers of elements in a set. For example, if you have a fruit bowl with only 5 apples in it, then the cardinality is 5. When you're talking about databases, cardinality can refer to the uniqueness of data values in a column. So, if a column has many unique values, it has a high cardinality. If it has repeated values, it has low cardinality. So imagine you pull up the scoreboard in COD after a map and 3 players on your team all got 20 kills each. These players will appear equally good based on this performance metric. So that's why Activision also includes kill-death ratios. The KD ratio doesn't include self-kills, so in order to stop reverse boosting, Activision includes another tier, kills, deaths by enemy. So how does a player's skill change over time? Well, Activision states that player skill can change over time for a variety of reasons. For example, someone could be using a new loadout, or they are simply tired or distracted. Therefore, it's important that a player's skill value is updated on an ongoing basis. They go on to state that even if skill could be tracked perfectly, and all matches were made with completely equal opponents, many players will still experience significant losses or win streaks. For instance, in any string of 5 perfectly equal games, the equivalent of a binomial distribution of a coin flipped 5 times, about 3% of players will experience a 5-game loss streak, and about 3% of players will experience a 5-game win streak. Essentially, Activision are saying that they can't track a player's skill perfectly, which we all already know because public lobbies are rarely balanced anyway, even if all players in it are of a similar skill level. So, if it's not possible to create fair, balanced and competitive lobbies, then why even track skill as a matchmaking factor? Activision states that one of their core design principles of COD is player first. Players of all levels should have fun and competitive experience with the game. Team balance is the first and most important reason to track skill. I think we can all agree that obviously teams should be balanced, and a skill rating is needed in the game in order to balance the teams. If Activision can't track skill, then they can't balance teams, and oftentimes this results in a blowout, which is not fun for players on the losing team. Balancing skill against other matchmaking factors quantifiably increases the extent to which most players play and enjoy COD. When skill is utilised in matchmaking, 80 to 90% of players experience better end of match placement, stick with the game longer, and quit matches less frequently. But then Activision goes on to state that when low to average skill players continually leave games and even stop playing the game altogether, then higher skill players end up playing with higher skill players. Obviously, higher skill players already play against higher skill players. So how do players who are below average or average, players that higher skill players can never even match up with anyway, affect their lobbies? It's such a stupid justification for matchmaking. Activision claims that when low skill players get shit on, they end up leaving the game and sometimes even stop playing altogether. Then, the average player playing COD becomes better. It's not that individuals get any better, it's simply because the lower skilled players have left. Therefore, the players we would have considered below average now become the new low skilled players. Imagine every COD player that was online was placed in either S tier, A tier, and so on, all the way down to F tier. If all the F tier players stop playing, then the average skill of a COD player also changes. As a result, the new lowest skilled players experience the negative outcomes and are likely to quit out of a match and quit playing altogether. This is a never-ending feedback loop. This is essentially the justification Activision provides for why the matchmaking process is the way it is. This is a non-excuse in my opinion. This was never a problem with previous COD titles prior to Modern Warfare 2019. Obviously, the longer the game is out, the player base naturally falls lower and becomes lower and lower over time. When the new COD is released, the active player base rises dramatically once again. It's literally the COD cycle. One of the main reasons they're trying to retain as much of the active player base as possible is because they want people to spend money in the game. They're using this negative feedback loop excuse as a justification for why engagement optimized matchmaking needs to be in the game. The majority of people agree skill needs to be tracked in order to balance teams, and a lot of people even don't mind coming up against players equal in skill. The real problem is, the game isn't about creating a fair and competitive environment. Listen, you need to understand what Activision is trying to do. They want engagement optimized matchmaking in the game because it increases the likelihood people spend more money on microtransactions. They're trying to steer the conversation about their matchmaking process to be about skill. They want people to debate whether or not skill should be a factor in matchmaking. The real debate should be about whether or not Activision should be manipulating our experience with the game, deciding when it's time for us to lose and when it's time for us to win. They say they track skill to balance the teams, which is fair enough, but they also track skill to make sure they can set up the statistical probability of us losing and winning when they decide. They do this because they have data that shows players are more likely to stay engaged and play longer when they experience more outcomes. That's the real problem, and that's the real thing that should be talked about. They don't want the majority of the player base to know what they are really doing. They don't want the majority of the player base to know that they are manipulating the lobbies. So what impact does skill have on the player experience? In early 2024, Activision ran an A/B test where they loosened the constraints on skill in matchmaking. Skill was only decreased, not entirely removed. Activision stated that they previously ran another test where skill was removed entirely, but this amplified the observed effects. Activision stated that in all their similar experiments involving skill as a factor in matchmaking were conducted post Modern Warfare 2019. Keep this in mind, because I'll come back to this. This experiment was run in North America only, and it used 50% of the player base in that region. Skill constraints were loosened, while the other half was left with the standard configuration. After a month of running this test, only the top skilled players returned and played more. The rest of the player base played the game less. Now, Activision says that this is evidence that the way they measure and implement skill as a factor in matchmaking is better for the overall player base. It's important to remember that this test occurred in early 2024. This is the time of year that the player base playing regularly drops off anyway. So is this really the case? Well, Activision has the real data, and they wouldn't implement skill the way they currently do if it wasn't monetarily valuable to them. So yeah, I do believe the majority of players probably did stop playing as much during this test. But remember, I mentioned that all experiments similar to this one, experiments that study how skill has an impact on the player base, all these experiments were conducted post 2019. So the player base, especially low skilled and average skilled players, are already accustomed to playing players of a similar skill over and over again. If they hop on a game and are suddenly coming up against players who are better than them, then they could have just assumed they were cheating. They could have just thought, oh, I'm in a bad lobby, and if I back out and try find another game, I'll get back to my normal lobbies. Since Modern Warfare 2019, players are essentially protected from the real competition. The majority of players probably aren't even aware of how matchmaking works, so it's reasonable to assume that after years of conditioning, when they are exposed to a higher caliber of player, they aren't familiar with it. Also, you have to keep in mind that this is a study of the player base who currently plays COD. It doesn't include the amount of people who have stopped playing because of skill-based matchmaking. You can think X-Defiant is a good game, you can think it's a shit game, it doesn't matter what your opinion is. X-Defiant has over 1 million active players daily. I'm pretty sure COD today only had about 86,000. So, you know. Look, whether or not the traditional pre-Modern Warfare 2019 COD titles had skill-based matchmaking or not, it's not really relevant. It's like a rabbit hole many of us get focused on. The traditional matchmaking experience, even if it did include skill as a matchmaking factor, was undeniably better. It felt more organic, and at least to our knowledge, we weren't being manipulated with forced wins and losses like we are now. Activision can present findings from their experiments as a justification for why the matchmaking process is better for everyone, but in reality, you're working with test subjects who have been conditioned to expect certain parameters. People assume numbers and data are definite. They assume data is clear-cut, absolute, and unchangeable. They assume data is an exact representation of reality, without ambiguity or interpretation. Statistical data can easily be manipulated and presented in misleading ways to create a false impression or support a particular agenda. If you want to learn more about how this is done, then I recommend you read the book How to Lie with Statistics. Anyway, right lads, I'm aware this video is getting long, so I'll quickly finish up. Activision said that skill has always been a consideration in matchmaking in COD ever since COD 4. However, they didn't have the abilities they currently have today. With the release of Modern Warfare 2019, Activision states that their capabilities have improved substantially. Is it any wonder the older COD titles had such better matchmaking? Activision didn't have the technical ability to manipulate our experience like they do now. Look, it's obvious the current engagement optimized matchmaking system is going nowhere. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually increases in Black Ops 6. Activision claimed in another experiment they tightened skill-based matchmaking up even more. In this experiment, when skill-based matchmaking was tuned up higher than ever before, the best players stopped playing altogether, but every other player group increased playing. But what's funny about this is that the negative feedback loop is going to occur again. The previous S-tier players who stopped playing public matches are going to be replaced by the A-tier players. When A-tier players become the new best players, they will eventually stop playing. As much as we don't like the current matchmaking system, it's obviously very monetarily valuable to Activision. The majority of players have no idea they are being manipulated, or that their unique experiences are rigged, all in order to be more proportionate. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink it. Anyway, that's all from me. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like. I post FPS gaming videos, so if you're into that, subscribe as well. I'll see you later.